half measures, I took it up quickly and wrapped myself in it completely. On the 6th of November, Allenby mounted another assault on Gaza. This time, the Australian light horse swept the Turks back into the Judean hills in one of the last great cavalry charges in history. Simultaneously, Lawrence undertook a diversionary raid on the Turkish lines of communication in the Yarmouk Gorge, west of Deira. And it was in the town of Deira that Lawrence was to face the most traumatic experience of his life. While planning another raid on the important rail junction at Deira, Lawrence slipped into the town on a reconnaissance, disguised as a light-skinned Circassian Arab. He was spotted by a Turkish guard and arrested. Brought before the local commander, or bey, he was whipped, tortured and abused. Early the next morning, he was able to escape, but the mental scars of his debasement would remain with him for the rest of his life. At the time, he told no one of the event, but those close to him noticed a change in his demeanor. His moods became darker, and the sense of humor that had sustained his companions throughout the campaign deserted him. However, 3 weeks later, he was present at the triumphal entry of General Allenby and his army into Jerusalem. Dressed in a borrowed army uniform, his diminutive stature of just 5 feet 5 inches was readily apparent among his fellow officers, though it was less obvious among the Bedouins with whom he fought. It was in Jerusalem that Lawrence met a man who would have a huge impact on his life, the American journalist Lowell Thomas.
I met Lawrence in Jerusalem. Allenby had called him in from the desert to decorate him in front of the Tower of David. I encountered Lawrence first on one of the narrow streets. He was with some Arabs. He didn't look like an Arab to me. And a little bit later, I got in touch with the British military governor of Jerusalem. I called him the successor to Pontius Pilate, Sir Ronald Storrs. And I told Storrs about this group of Arabs, and one who was a blonde wondered who he was. And Storrs opened a door to an adjoining room, and there he was. And Storrs was the one who was responsible for labeling Lawrence, because he said to me, "I want you to meet the uncrowned king of Arabia."
And with that, the legend of Lawrence of Arabia was born. In early 1918, Allenby renewed his offensive against the Turks with the intention of capturing the strategic city of Damascus. In support of these operations, Lawrence fought one of his most decisive battles at Tafila, where he crushed 3 Turkish infantry battalions. In a brilliantly executed cavalry charge, 900 Turks and all their guns and baggage were trapped in a narrow valley. During the headlong charge, Lawrence inadvertently shot his own camel in the back of the head with his revolver. The animal died instantly, and Lawrence was flung to the ground and knocked unconscious. "400 Turks were killed and 250 taken prisoner. The others fled in disarray." For his exploits in the Battle of Tafila, Lawrence was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. During the advance on Damascus, Lawrence incorporated British Army troops into his forces, and as always, his powers of leadership were inspirational to those he commanded.
Lawrence, of course, was not militaristic in the ordinary sense. I think this is what endeared him to us. No staff college training. He was just a natural guerrilla leader with a thorough knowledge of the country, its people, its languages, its customs. the whole of the camel corps, or at least the whole of those of us who served with him, absolutely worshipped him. And later on, of course, he personally reconnoitred every one of our objectives before we were committed to the attack.
By now, the Turks were in headlong retreat, and on several occasions they massacred innocent Arabs sheltering from the fighting. One such atrocity occurred at the village of Tafas on the 27th of September 1918, when the retreating Turks barbarically butchered women and children. Lawrence and the Arab army were not far behind. They exacted an awful revenge. Lawrence later wrote, "By my order we took no prisoners for the only time in our war." In the madness born of the horror of Tafas, we killed and killed, even blowing in the heads of the fallen and the animals, as though their death and running blood could slake our agony. By now, Lawrence was a lieutenant colonel, but as the Allied forces neared Damascus, he determined to play one more card for the Arab cause. On the 1st of October 1918, he rushed the city with his Bedouin warriors in the hope that an Arab administration could be installed before the arrival of the hated French. It was to no avail. The urban and desert Arabs could not resolve their differences, except for their hatred of the Turks, who were butchered unmercifully. Such was the chaos that Australian troops had to enter the city to restore some semblance of order. When General Allenby arrived, he quickly disabused Prince Faisal of any Arab aspirations for independence. Insult was added to injury by using Lawrence as the official interpreter. It was too much for Lawrence. The years of mental anguish and physical hardship had taken their toll. Malaria, dysentery, and the festering sores from months on camelback had left him a shadow of his former robust self. He made the only personal request of his army career when he asked General Allenby for permission to go home. Lawrence's dream of an independent Arab nation lay in ruins. Lawrence returned to the family home in Oxford, but it was never the same. He had lost 2 brothers in the war, killed on the Western Front, and for all his efforts, he would not see an independent Arab nation. But Lawrence remained dogged. He bombarded the government with his proposals for the Arab world after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. He still sought a united Arab kingdom that would be aligned with the British Empire. But as far as the British government was concerned, this was never a consideration. It was only through Lawrence's personal efforts that Prince Faisal was even given a seat at the 1919 Versailles Peace Conference, when the fate of the Middle East would be decided. Of the victorious nations, the French had made the greatest sacrifices, and they now expected the greatest spoils. These included the newly formed countries of Lebanon and Syria. Britain acquired Palestine, the Transjordan, and Mesopotamia. Britain and France carved up the region between them and set the seal for the continuing troubles in the Middle East. Lawrence's political solution would probably have avoided many of the wars that were to come and saved hundreds of thousands of lives in the lands that he had served so nobly. Meanwhile, Lowell Thomas's film of the war in the Near East, with Lawrence cast as the romantic hero, was shown to the world, and the legend of Lawrence of Arabia was born. At first, Lawrence was amused by the